The sound of cheap cardboard unfolding is distinct. It's a dry, hollow scrape that usually signals moving day or perhaps the arrival of a package you've been waiting for. But when I heard that sound coming from my kitchen island at 9 a.m. on a Sunday, accompanied by the smell of stale Folgers coffee and my mother's overpowering lavender perfume, I knew it signaled neither of those things. It signaled a coup. I walked into the kitchen, the granite countertops gleaming under the pendant lights I had installed 3 months ago. My mother, a woman who had confused opinion for fact since the Reagan administration, was standing there. She flattened a used cardboard box, one that looked like it had originally held bananas from Costco, and slid it across the island toward me. It stopped right next to my coffee mug. "You're single, Michael," she said. She didn't look at me. She was busy aggressively wiping a crumb off the counter with a wet rag. "You don't need 3 bedrooms. It's excessive. It's selfish, really." I paused, my mug halfway to my mouth. The morning sun was streaming through the bay windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was a peaceful morning, right up until this moment. "Good morning to you too, Mom," I said, my voice flat. "Is there a reason you're handing me a box, usually reserved for produce?" She finally looked up. Her eyes were hard, the kind of look a manager gives an employee right before firing them. "Your brother is moving in on Saturday. Gary needs the space. He has the kids to think about. You know how hard it's been for him since the divorce." I took a slow sip of coffee. "Gary is 40 years old, Mom. He has 3 kids with 2 different women. And last I checked, he was living in your basement." "Exactly," she snapped. "And our basement is damp. It's not good for the boy's asthma. So, your father and I decided. Gary and the kids take the house. You're going to take the box." She gestured to the cardboard flat. "Pack what you need for a few days," she continued, her voice gaining that rhythmic, lecturing cadence I had loathed since childhood. "You can stay at the Motel 6 off the highway until you find an apartment. Something small. A studio. You're rarely home anyway with that job of yours. Be out by noon," my father added, walking in from the living room. He was wearing his world's best grandpa t-shirt, looking at me with a mixture of pity and disdain. "Gary's coming over at 1 to measure for curtains." I set my mug down, a ceramic clack against the stone. Most people would scream. Most people would ask, "How could you?" or cry about the unfairness of it all. But I don't do that. I am a forensic accountant. I spend my days tracking hidden assets, untangling corporate fraud, and finding the smoking gun in stacks of boring financial ledgers. I deal in facts. I deal in paper trails. And I deal in leverage. I looked at the box. Then I looked at my parents. 2 people who had floated through life on credit cards and denial. "Let me get this straight," I said, leaning forward, resting my elbows on the island. "You are evicting me? From here?" "We are doing what is best for the family," my father said, puffing out his chest. "We're the parents. It's our decision." I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a dry, scratching sound. "You think you own this house?" I asked softly. My mother scoffed. "Don't start with technicalities, Michael. It's the family home. We raised you here." "You raised me here until 2008, I corrected. "Then you went bankrupt. You lost everything. You were 3 days away from the sheriff throwing your furniture onto the lawn." The room went quiet. They hated talking about 2008. To them, the financial crisis was just a patch of bad luck, not the result of refinancing their equity 5 times to buy boats and vacations they couldn't afford. "I bought this house from the bank, Mom," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "I bought the note. I paid off the arrears. I put the deed in my name. You aren't the owners. You're the tenants. And you haven't paid rent in 15 years because I was being a good son." My father waved his hand dismissively. "That was just paperwork. We'll let you put it in your name to save our credit score. It's still our house." "Is it?" I walked over to the refrigerator. Held against the stainless steel door by a magnet shaped like a pizza slice was a drawing my nephew had made. Beneath it, hidden in plain sight, was a red folder. I had kept it there for 3 years, ever since they started hinting that Gary deserved more support. I pulled the folder down. I opened it. "This," I said, holding up a document with a red stamp on the top, "is a notice to quit. A formal eviction notice." My mother's face went pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "And this," I said, pulling out a glossy trifold brochure, is a pamphlet for the Shady Pines state-subsidized assisted living facility. Because if Gary is moving in here, that means you too are moving out. And since you have zero equity and zero savings, this is about the only place that will take you. I slapped the eviction notice onto the fridge door, replacing the pizza magnet. You have 30 days, I said, and tell Gary not to bother measuring for curtains. I prefer blinds. To understand the sheer magnitude of the delusion I was dealing with, you have to understand the dynamic of the Miller family. In every family tree, there is usually a root system and a few bad apples. In my family, the tree was rotten, and I was the only branch that had decided to grow toward the sunlight instead of the sewer. I am what you might call the spare. In the royal sense, there is the heir and the spare. Gary was the heir. I was the insurance policy. Growing up, Gary was the star. Captain of the football team, prom king, the guy who could charm a teacher into changing a C- to a B+. He was loud, charismatic, and completely allergic to consequences. If Gary broke a window, it was the window's fault. If Gary got a speeding ticket, the cop was a jerk. My parents fed this beast. They applauded his mediocrity and shielded him from reality. I, on the other hand, was quiet. I was the kid in the corner with a calculator and a book on economics. I didn't play sports. I played the stock market simulation game in computer lab. While Gary was out drinking beers in the woods, I was mowing lawns and putting the money into a high-yield savings account. By the time we hit our 20s, the trajectories were set. Gary peaked at 18. He drifted from job to job, bartender, personal trainer, entrepreneur, never sticking with anything for more than 6 months. He married a woman he met at a club, had a kid, got divorced, married another woman, had 2 more kids, and was currently in the process of wrecking that marriage too. And me? I went to school. I got my CPA. I specialized in forensic accounting. I learned how money moves, how people hide it, and how the law views ownership. I became a man of contracts and clauses. I built a life of silence and security. Then came 2008, the Great Recession. My parents had treated their home equity like a limitless ATM. They had refinanced so many times the house was underwater. It was practically at the bottom of the Marianas Trench. When the crash hit, my father's construction business dried up. The foreclosure notices started coming. I remember the night they told me. I was 24, working my first big corporate job. They sat me down at that same kitchen table, weeping. They were going to lose the family legacy. They were going to be homeless. Gary, of course, was nowhere to be found. He was backpacking in Thailand on their dime. So I stepped in. I used my entire signing bonus and my life savings to buy the house at the foreclosure auction. It was a strategic move. I got the property for pennies on the dollar. But I didn't just hand it back to them. Even then, at 24, I knew better. I drafted a lease agreement. I can still see my father's face when I put the paper in front of him 15 years ago. "What's this?" he had asked, squinting at the fine print. "It's a lease, Dad," I had said. "On the house now. You are the tenants. The rent is $0, provided you pay the property taxes and the insurance. We're family, Michael. We don't need contracts," my mother had wailed. "I need contracts," I said firmly. "Sign it, or the bank takes the keys on Monday." They signed. They didn't read it. They just signed it to make the problem go away so they could go back to pretending they were affluent suburbanites. They never read Clause 14. They never read Clause 22 regarding quiet enjoyment and unauthorized occupants. They forgot that the paper existed the moment the ink was dry. For 15 years, I let them live there. I paid for the new roof. I paid for the new furnace. I lived in the master suite, which I converted into a separate apartment, essentially, while they had the run of the rest of the house. It was a symbiotic relationship, or so I thought. I got a cheap place to live and built equity. They kept their dignity and a roof over their heads. But parasites don't like symbiosis. They want to consume the host. Over the last 6 months, the dynamic had shifted. Gary had lost his job at the car dealership. His second wife had kicked him out. He was crashing on the couch in the living room more and more often. I would come home from a 10-hour shift auditing a corrupt pharmaceutical company to find Gary drinking my scotch and watching my TV. "Hey, little bro," he'd say, not even looking up. "We're out of ice." My parents started the whisper campaign. "Gary is going through a hard time. Gary needs stability. You have so much money, Michael. You can afford to live anywhere." They started seeing my success not as a point of pride, but as a resource to be harvested. They looked at my bank account, which they assumed was massive, though I never discussed numbers, and decided that it was actually their bank account. The entitlement had been building like pressure in a boiler. And this morning, with the cardboard box and the command to be out by noon, the boiler had finally exploded. But they had made a critical error in their calculations. They were playing checkers, emotional, messy, loud checkers. I was playing chess, and I had been positioning my pieces for 15 years. Back in the kitchen, the silence following my eviction notice comment was heavy. My mother stared at the red folder on the fridge. "You wouldn't," she whispered. "You wouldn't evict your own parents." "I'm not evicting my parents," I said, my voice calm, almost clinical. "I'm evicting 2 tenants who are conspiring to move an unauthorized occupant, Gary, into my property in violation of their lease. And since you just verbally confirmed that Gary is moving in on Saturday, you have essentially confessed to a future breach of contract." "This is your brother," my father shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "He has children. Where are they supposed to go?" "Gary has a condo," I pointed out. "The one you guys helped him put a down payment on 5 years ago. He had to sell it," my mother said quickly, looking away. "To pay off some debts. Gambling debts. I knew it. They knew it. We all pretended we didn't know it." "That's not my problem," I said. "And it's certainly not a reason for me to move into a Motel 6. My father stood up. He was a big man, used to using his physical presence to intimidate people. He walked around the island and got in my face. "You listen to me," he growled. "I don't care what piece of paper you have. I am your father. This is my house. I built that deck. I planted those trees. You're going to pack your things, and you're going to leave. If you try to bring the law into this, I will make sure every person in this town knows what an ungrateful, heartless son you are. I will cut you off from this family forever." I looked at him. I looked at the veins bulging in his neck. I looked at the fear behind his eyes, the fear of a man who knows he has no power but is trying to bluff his way through with volume. And that's when I decided, if I fought them now, right here in the kitchen, it would be messy. They would scream. They would call the aunts and uncles. It would be a war of attrition. No, that wasn't the way. I needed to let them think they had won. I needed to let them overextend. I needed them to commit the crime fully before I brought down the gavel. I needed to execute a strategic pivot. I looked down at the floor, feigning submission. I let my shoulders slump. I let out a long, defeated sigh. "Okay," I whispered. My father blinked. "What?" "Okay," I said, looking up with dead eyes. "You win. You're right. Family comes first. I can't fight you on this." A slow, smug smile spread across my father's face. He looked back at my mother. "See? I told you. You just needed a reminder of who's in charge." My mother let out a breath she'd been holding. "Oh, Michael. Thank you. You're doing the right thing. Gary needs this." "I'll pack a bag," I said, turning away so they wouldn't see the cold calculation in my eyes. "I'll stay at the hotel for a few weeks. Give Gary time to settle in. We can figure out the paperwork later." "Good," my father said, clapping me on the back. "Good man. Be out by noon, son." I walked to my room. I didn't pack clothes. I packed my safe. I packed my hard drives. I packed the original deed to the house. I was leaving the battlefield, but I was leaving behind landmines. And I was going to wait until they were standing right on top of them before I clicked the detonator. Silence is a weapon. Most people are uncomfortable with it. They feel the need to fill the void with noise, with explanations, with apologies. But in my line of work, silence is how you catch a thief. You don't yell when you find a first discrepancy in the ledger. You wait. You watch. You let them think they've gotten away with it, so they get sloppy. They start buying Ferraris. They start transferring larger sums. And that is when you nail them. I checked into a residence in 3 towns over. It was sterile, beige, and smelled of industrial carpet cleaner. It was perfect. For 25 days, I didn't answer my phone. I let 37 calls from my mother go to voicemail. I ignored 14 texts from Gary, mostly asking for the Netflix password or the code to the garage keypad. I didn't ghost them completely, though. I was watching every move they made. When I bought the house, I had installed a comprehensive smart home system. Cameras at the front door, the back door, the driveway, and motion sensors in the main hallways. I could control the thermostat, the locks, and the lights from my laptop. I sat in that hotel room, drinking bad coffee, watching the destruction of my property in 1080p high definition. Day 2, Gary's moving truck arrived. It wasn't a professional mover. It was a buddy with a flatbed trailer. I watched them scrape my hardwood floors, dragging a filthy sectional sofa into the living room. I watched Gary toss cigarette butts into my manicured rose bushes. I logged the time and date in a spreadsheet. Destruction of landscaping. Breach of lease clause 9. Maintenance of premises. Day 7. The contractor's van showed up. This was the moment I had been waiting for. My mother had mentioned making room for Gary. I watched as a man in a dusty t-shirt walked in with a sledgehammer. I switched the feed to the interior hallway sensor, which had audio. "Are you sure about this, Mrs. Miller?" the contractor asked. "This looks like a load-bearing wall. To open up the master suite like you want, we need a steel beam." "That's expensive. Just do it." My mother's voice came through, tinny but clear. "We want an open concept. Gary needs to feel like he has space to breathe. We have the cash. We took it out of the IRA. I froze. They were draining their retirement account, the only money they had left in the world, to renovate a house they didn't own for a son who wouldn't pay a dime in rent. "I can knock it down," the contractor said, "but without the permit, it's going to be cash only. And if the ceiling sags, that's on you." "We don't need a permit," my father boomed. "It's my house. I know how it was built." He didn't know how it was built. He was a salesman, not an architect. I watched on the screen as the sledgehammer swung. Crack. Dust flew. They were tearing down the wall, separating the master bedroom from the study to create a suite for Gary. I didn't call the police. Not yet. If I stopped them now, they would just have a messy wall. I needed them to finish. I needed the money to be spent. I needed the structural integrity of the house to be compromised so that the law wouldn't just be on my side, it would be forced to intervene. Day 25. The work was done. I saw the invoices on the kitchen counter through the zoom lens of the drop cam I'd hidden in the smoke detector. They had spent $42,000. The bathroom was tiled with imported marble. The wall was gone. The ceiling in the hallway had a noticeable dip, a hairline crack running along the plaster like a spiderweb. They were celebrating. I saw the invitation on Facebook. Gary's homecoming and housewarming party. Saturday at 6 p.m. It was time. I closed my laptop. I put on my best suit, charcoal gray, tailored sharp. I picked up the thick envelope of documents I had prepared with my lawyer. Then I made 2 phone calls. The first was to the County Sheriff's Civil Division. I had the eviction order signed by a judge 3 days ago, based on the emergency clause of destruction of property. The second call was to an old friend from college, now a structural engineer for the city. "Dave," I said, "I need a favor. I have a property that I believe is in immediate danger of collapse due to unauthorized renovations. I need a formal condemnation inspection. Tonight." "Tonight?" Dave asked. "It's Saturday. I'm paying triple your consulting rate," I said, "and you'll get to see justice served. Trust me, you don't want to miss this." But before we get to that Saturday night, before the flashing lights and the condemnation notice, we need to talk about the 25 days that preceded it. Because the real justice wasn't just in the eviction, it was in the watching. There is a specific kind of agony in watching a car crash in slow motion. But when you're the one who cut the brake lines of the car that stole your parking spot, the agony transforms into a dark, cold satisfaction. For those 3 weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I was the corporate auditor sitting in boardrooms in a charcoal suit, dissecting quarterly earnings reports. By night, I was the ghost in the machine of my own home. I had set up my command center on the small desk in the hotel room. 2 monitors, one for my work, one for the house feeds. Day 4, the infection spreads. It didn't take long for Gary to mark his territory. It was subtle at first. A coat thrown on the floor instead of hung up. A pizza box left open on the leather ottoman. But by day 4, the golden child syndrome was in full effect. I watched on the living room camera as Gary walked in at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. He was wearing pajama pants and a tank top. He wasn't looking for a job. He wasn't helping my father with the yard. He walked over to my liquor cabinet, a collection I had curated over 10 years. Rare Japanese whiskeys, small batch bourbons. He grabbed a bottle of Hibiki 21, a bottle that costs nearly $1,000. He didn't pour it into a Glencairn glass to savor it. He grabbed a red Solo cup, filled it to the brim, and topped it off with Coke. I flinched. Physically. In the hotel room, I gripped the edge of the desk until my knuckles turned white. That's destruction of assets, I whispered to the empty room. I opened my spreadsheet. Item 4. Theft and waste of consumables. Value, $900. Then, he tried to turn on the TV. I had anticipated this. The 85-inch OLED in the living room was connected to the smart home network. From my hotel room, I had activated child lock mode. I watched Gary click the remote. Nothing. He clicked it again. He smacked the remote against his hand. He walked up to the TV and pressed the manual button. A message popped up on the screen, bright blue letters against a black background. System locked. Contact administrator. Mom, Gary yelled. The audio feed on the camera was crisp. Mom, the TV is broken. Michael did something to it. My mother came running in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. What is it, honey? What's wrong? He locked it. Gary whined, pointing at the screen like a toddler. I can't watch the game. Call him. Tell him to give us the code. My mother sighed. She pulled out her phone. In the hotel room, my cell phone buzzed. Mom calling. I let it ring. Once. Twice. Then I sent it to voicemail. I watched the screen. My mother shook her head. He's not answering. He's probably at work. He's doing this on purpose, Gary spat. He threw the remote onto the couch. It bounced off and hit the floor. He's such a petty little jerk. Who locked the TV? Don't worry, my mother soothed him, patting his arm. We'll buy a new one. A better one. We don't need his code. I smiled. Go ahead, I thought. Buy a new TV. Spend the money. Day 11. The contractor's grift. This was the turning point. The day the financial bleeding truly began. The contractor my father had hired was a guy named Rick. I knew Rick's type. He drove a van with a magnetic sign on the side that was peeling at the corners. He didn't have a license number listed. He was a cash-only, no permits, I know a guy operator. I watched the consultation from the smoke detector camera in the hallway. Rick was standing in the master bedroom, tapping the wall with a knuckle. Yeah, see, this here is going to be tricky, Rick said, sucking his teeth. You want an open concept suite for the boy, right? But this house, these older builds, they got quirks. The house was built in 1998. It wasn't an older build. It was standard stick framing. Rick was fishing. We just want it done right, my father said, puffing out his chest. Cost isn't the issue. We want Gary to be comfortable. Rick's eyes lit up. He smelled the desperation. He smelled the ego. Well, Rick said, scratching his chin, if we take this wall out, we gotta reroute the HVAC. And the electrical looks a little non-compliant. I might have to rip out the subfloor to get to the junction box. That's gonna bump the labor up. How much? My father asked. Original quote was 15, Rick said. With the electrical and the structural support, I'm gonna need 25. Half up front. Cash. Materials are expensive right now, you know. Supply chain. $25,000. For a job that should have cost 8, maybe 10 tops if done legally. Rick was robbing them blind. My father didn't flinch. Or rather, he pretended not to. I saw the hesitation in his shoulders, the way he glanced at my mother. That was half their liquid savings. Fine, my father said. Can you start Monday? You got the cash, I got the hammer, Rick grinned. I'll log it all. Unauthorized alteration. Use of unlicensed contractor. Potential electrical code violations. I could have called the city then. I could have stopped it. But if I stopped it then, they would still have the money. They would still have the means to fight me, to hire a lawyer, to drag this out in probate court or family court. I needed them destitute. I needed them to have zero resources to fight the eviction. I let Rick start swinging the hammer. Day 18, the money talk. The demolition was done. The house was a mess of drywall dust and exposed wires. The renovation looked more like a bomb site. I was working late at the hotel, reviewing a deposition for my actual job, when a motion sensor in the kitchen alerted me. 11:45 p.m. I maximized the window. My parents were sitting at the kitchen island, the same island where they had evicted me 3 weeks prior. The lights were dim. My father had a bottle of whiskey out, mine again, and a stack of papers. "We're bleeding, Linda," my father said. His voice was low, stripped of the bravado he used when Gary was in the room. "It's just temporary," my mother whispered. She was clutching a coffee mug with both hands. "Once Gary gets settled, he'll find a job. He said he has a lead on a management position." "Gary has had a lead for 6 years," my father snapped. "Rick wants another 10 grand for the bathroom fixtures. He says the marble we picked out is on back order and the price went up." "Give it to him," my mother said. "We don't have in the checking account," my father said. He slammed his hand on the paper stack. "We're down to the IRA. If we pull that out, the penalties, Linda, the taxes." "Michael has plenty of money," my mother said. I froze. I leaned closer to the speaker. "What?" my father asked. "Michael," she repeated. "When he comes back, or when we finally settle this, he'll help. He always helps. He's just throwing a tantrum right now. But he won't let us starve. He won't let the house fall apart. He'll pay for it eventually. He's the responsible one." I felt a coldness spread through my chest that I had never felt before. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. They weren't just using my house. They were using my character. They were banking on my morality to subsidize their immorality. They were gambling their entire future on the bet that I was too weak to let them fail. They were treating my love as a line of credit. "You really think so?" my father asked, sounding hopeful. "I know so," my mother said. "He's a good boy. He's not like Gary. Gary needs us. Michael is just an insurance policy. You used the policy when you crashed the car. An insurance policy. That was the phrase that sealed their fate. I wasn't their son. I was their safety net. And they were slashing the ropes because they assumed I would just knit them back together." I picked up my phone. I dialed my lawyer's personal cell. It was midnight. "Andrew," his sleepy voice answered. "Draft the civil suit," I said. "Include the garnishment order. I want to go for the maximum." "Did something happen?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, watching my parents pour another drink of my whiskey. "The insurance policy just got canceled. Day 23, the legal fortress." 2 days before the party, I met with my attorney, Marcus, at a diner halfway between the hotel and the city. Marcus was a shark in a cheap suit. He specialized in landlord-tenant disputes and high-conflict divorces. He loved misery. I slid the flash drive across the table. "What's this?" Marcus asked, dipping a fry in mayonnaise. "Evidence," I said. "Video of the unlicensed work. Audio of them admitting they're using retirement funds to damage the property. Copies of the lease they signed in 2008. And the deed." Marcus plugged the drive into his laptop. He clicked through the files. He whistled low. "You recorded everything?" "Clause 22 of the lease," I recited. "Landlord reserves the right to install security devices in common areas." They signed it. Marcus laughed. A dry, hacking sound. "This isn't a lawsuit, Michael. This is an autopsy. You have them dead to rights on 4 different counts. Trespassing, destruction of property, breach of contract, and, with the structural issues you mentioned, endangerment. I want the eviction to be immediate," I said. "No 30-day notice to cure. I want them out that night. If the structural engineer signs off that the house is uninhabitable." Marcus nodded. "I can get a judge to sign an emergency ex parte order. It's the nuclear option. Police escort. Immediate vacate." "Do it," I said. Marcus paused. He looked at me over his glasses. "You know, usually when clients do this, it's against a squatter or a bad tenant who cooked meth in the bathtub. These are your parents." "No," I said, taking a sip of black coffee. "My parents died in 2008. These are just people who look like them." Marcus nodded slowly. "All right, I'll have a sheriff meet you there at 6:30 on Saturday." Day 25, mourning the voicemails. The morning of the party, I woke up to 7 new voicemails. I lay in the hotel bed, staring at the stucco ceiling, and listened to them in order. It was a fascinating case study in manipulation. Voicemail 1, 10 a.m. Michael, it's Mom. Just wanted to remind you about the party tonight. I know things were tense, but Gary really wants you there. We're making your favorite potato salad. Call me back. The rewrite history tactic. Voicemail 2, 11:30 a.m. Hey, it's Dad. Look, we need you to move your car. The one you left in the garage? We need the space for the beer kegs. Come by and move it, or I'll have to tow it. The threat. Voicemail 3, 2 p.m. Michael? It's Mom again. Are you okay? We haven't heard from you in weeks. Please just pick up. We're worried. The feigned concern. Voicemail 4, 4:15 p.m. Yo, bro. It's Gary. Listen, Mom's crying because you're ghosting her. Don't be a dick, man. Just come over, have a beer, and apologize. We can put this all behind us. Also, do you know the Wi-Fi password? It's not working again. The gaslight. I deleted them all. I took a long shower. I shaved with a straight razor. I dressed slowly, methodically. White shirt, starched. Silk tie, Windsor knot. Cufflinks. I looked in the mirror. I didn't look like the spare anymore. I didn't look like the kid who stayed in his room, playing computer games while his brother got the glory. I looked like the landlord. I checked out of the hotel. I paid the bill with the credit card that I was about to stop paying regarding the house utilities. I got into my car and drove toward the house. The sun was setting. The sky was a bruised purple. As I turned onto my street, I saw the cars lining the block. I heard the bass of the music. They were celebrating. They were toasting to their victory. They were drinking to the successful conquest of my life. I pulled over to wait for the sheriff. I watched the house for one last minute before the chaos began. It looked warm, inviting. From the outside, it looked like a happy home. But I knew better. I knew the walls were missing. I knew the foundation was cracking. And I knew that inside, the termites were throwing a party. It was time to call the exterminator. The driveway was full of cars. My aunt's minivan, my cousin's lifted truck, and smack in the middle, blocking everyone else in, was Gary's new lease, a Dodge Challenger. Of course, he was unemployed, homeless, and living off his parents, but he had a muscle car. The logic of the parasite. I parked my sedan across the street. I waited until I saw the sheriff's cruiser turn the corner, lights off, rolling slowly. Dave pulled up behind him in his city truck, clipboard in hand. We walked up the driveway together. The formidable phalanx of reality crashing into the fantasy world my parents had built. I could hear the music from the lawn. Classic rock. Laughter. The smell of barbecue. They were having a great time. They thought I was gone. They thought I was defeated, cowering in a hotel room, accepting my fate as the good son who pays the bills and disappears. I opened the front door without knocking. I still had my key after all. The living room was packed. My mother was holding a tray of deviled eggs. Gary was in the center of the room, beer in hand, recounting some exaggerated story about a fight he won in a bar. My father was at the stereo. I stepped into the light. "Turn the music off," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room. The chatter died instantly. My father frowned, reaching to lower the volume. "Michael," my mother said, a nervous smile plastering onto her face. You came. I knew you would. Come, have a deviled egg." We were just toasting Gary's new chapter. Gary smirked. "Did you come to apologize, bro? It's cool. I forgive you. Grab a beer." I didn't move. I stepped aside, revealing the uniformed deputy sheriff and Dave, who was wearing a hard hat and a high-visibility vest. The room went ice cold. "What is this?" my father demanded, stepping forward. "Who are these people?" "This," I said, pointing to the deputy, "is Deputy Miller. No relation. He's here to serve the immediate eviction order for breach of lease, malicious destruction of property, and endangerment of the dwelling." I pointed to Dave. "And this is the city structural engineer. He's here to inspect the load-bearing wall you illegally removed. You call the cops on your family?" Gary shouted, his bravado cracking instantly. "You rat." "I called the police on my tenants," I corrected. I handed the thick envelope to my father. He took it, his hands shaking. "You have 20 minutes to vacate the premises," I said. "Not 30 days. 20 minutes. The judge granted an emergency order because you have made the house structurally unsafe." "That's a lie," my mother screamed. "We made it beautiful. We spent $40,000 on that renovation." "You spent $40,000 destroying my asset," I said coldly. "Dave, go check the span." Dave walked past them, ignoring their protests. He went to the master suite. He came back 30 seconds later, looking grim. "It's bad, Michael," Dave said, loud enough for everyone to hear. They took out the main support post for the second-floor joists. The ceiling has dropped 2 inches. This house is a death trap. If we get a heavy snow, the roof comes down. I'm posting a condemnation notice. Nobody can sleep here tonight. It's illegal to occupy. The silence that followed was total. My aunts and uncles were shrinking back, trying to disappear into the wallpaper. They realized suddenly that this wasn't a family squabble. This was a legal execution. But my mother stammered, tears streaming down her face. "But we spent the money. We don't have any more. We have nowhere to go." "You spent your money on a house you don't own," I said. "You poured your life savings into a renovation I didn't authorize. That money is gone. You can't get it back from the contractor because the work was illegal." "Michael, please," my father begged, the bluster completely gone. He looked old suddenly, defeated. "We're your parents. You can't throw us on the street." "I'm not," I said. I reached into my inside suit pocket. I pulled out the glossy brochure I had taken from the fridge 25 days ago. The Shady Pines state-subsidized assisted living facility. I walked over and placed it gently in my mother's hand. "I made a call," I said. "They have a double room available. It's small. It smells like bleach, but it's safe. And the government pays for it, which is good, because I'm suing you for the $40,000 in damages to the structure. You're going to be garnished for the rest of your lives." I turned to Gary. He was pale, backing away toward the kitchen. "And you," I said, "the sheriff has a criminal trespass warning for you. If you step foot on this property again, you go to jail. Good luck with the lease on that Challenger." "Get out," I said. "All of you. Now." The party ended. Watching them leave was a pathetic procession. My mother weeping, clutching the nursing home brochure. My father carrying a trash bag of clothes, looking at the floor. Gary peeling out of the driveway in his car, leaving them behind because his new chapter didn't include taking care of homeless parents. I stood on the front lawn with the deputy and Dave. The house was dark. The yellow condemned sticker was slapped on the front door. It would cost me $50,000 to fix the damage. I would have to sell the place. Too many ghosts now. But as I watched the taillights of my family disappear down the street, I didn't feel a sense of loss. I felt the cool, clean weight of justice. I had lost a house, but I had regained my life. And the silence? The silence was beautiful. The fallout of a nuclear option is rarely quiet. In the movies, the hero walks away from the explosion in slow motion, never looking back. In real life, there is paperwork. Mountains of it. But for a forensic accountant, paperwork is just another form of ammunition. The week after the party, the reality of the situation settled in like a cold fog. The house sat empty, a yellow danger tape stretching across the front porch. I hired a licensed crew to fix the structural damage. It cost me $55,000 to beam the ceiling, replace the drywall, and restore the load-bearing support my father had arrogantly removed. I filed the lawsuit the day the repairs began. Michael Miller versus Gary Miller Sr. and Linda Miller. Cause of action: waste, malicious destruction of real property, and breach of contract. My lawyer told me it was aggressive. He asked if I really wanted to garnish my parents' meager pension. "It's not about the money," I told him, signing the affidavit. "It's about the lesson. If I don't take it, they will convince themselves they were the victims. I need a court judgment to serve as the historical record of their stupidity." The judgment came down 3 months later. Default. They didn't even show up to court. They couldn't afford a lawyer, and Gary certainly wasn't going to pay for one. The judge awarded me the full cost of repairs plus legal fees. The state began garnishing 25% of their monthly Social Security checks. I visited them once at Shady Pines. I needed to drop off some tax documents they had left behind in the chaos. The facility was exactly as the brochure described: affordable senior living, which is a polite way of saying government-funded waiting room for the inevitable. The floors were linoleum. The air smelled of boiled cabbage and industrial disinfectant. I found them in the common room, watching a game show on a fuzzy television. My mother looked smaller. The arrogance that had fueled her demand for my house had evaporated, replaced by a bewildered fragility. My father wouldn't look at me. He stared at the floor, his hands gripping the arms of a plastic chair. "Here are your 1,099s, I said, placing the envelope on the table. My mother looked up. Her eyes were wet. "Gary hasn't visited," she whispered. "Not once." "I know," I said. "Gary doesn't visit people who can't give him things." "He's struggling," she said, the old reflex kicking in, but it sounded hollow now. "He lost the car." "I know that too," I said. "I saw the repo notice at the old house before I sold it. I had sold the house 3 weeks prior. Even with the repair costs, the market was hot. I cleared $150,000 in profit. I took that money and bought a townhome in a gated community with 24-hour security. The kind of place where you need a code, a clicker, and a confirmed appointment to get past the gatehouse." "We messed up, Michael," my father mumbled. It was the first time in his life I had heard him admit a mistake. "Yes," I said. "You did. You bet on the wrong horse. And you tried to steal the stable from the only horse that was actually pulling the cart. I didn't offer to get them out. I didn't offer to write a check. That would have undone everything. They were safe. They were fed. They had a roof. That was more than they had provided for me when they handed me a cardboard box and told me to be out by noon." I turned and walked out. The automatic doors slid shut behind me, cutting off the smell of cabbage and regret. As for Gary, he ended up exactly where men like him always end up when the enablers run out of resources. His wife filed for divorce when the free house fantasy collapsed. She took the kids. Gary is currently living in a rented room above a garage, working under the table for a landscaping crew. He called me once, about 6 months after the eviction. "Hey man," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm in a bad spot. I just need a couple grand to get back on my feet. Family helps family, right?" I didn't say a word. I just let the silence stretch out over the line, heavy and suffocating, until he hung up. I blocked the number. There's a misconception in our society about the golden child. We think they are the lucky ones. We think they are the winners because they get the praise, the resources, and the unconditional love. But the golden child is cursed. They're crippled by the very support that feels like love. They're never forced to develop the muscles of survival. They're never forced to learn the language of consequence. So when the real world finally hits them, and it always hits them, they shatter like glass. My parents built a shrine to Gary's potential, but they built it on a foundation of my hard work. They thought because I was quiet, I was weak. They thought because I was generous, I was stupid. They thought that blood was a legal defense for theft. They were wrong. If you're the spare in your family, if you're the one who fixes the problems and pays the bills while the other sibling gets the glory, listen to me closely. You hold the cards. You always have. The money is yours. The deed is yours. The leverage is yours. Do not be afraid to use it. Do not be afraid to let them hit rock bottom. Rock bottom is the only place where the truth lives. My parents are in a nursing home because they renovated a house they didn't own. Gary is broken because he never learned to build anything for himself. And me? I'm sitting on my balcony, drinking a cup of coffee that costs more than the box they handed me. The sun is shining. The air is quiet. They mistook my silence for submission. They didn't realize that in the world of finance and law, silence isn't surrender. Silence is the sound of the trap snapping shut. This is Andrew signing off. Stay solvent. Stay secure. And never, ever let them see the eviction notice until it's already on the fridge.